All right, so our to-do list is successfully adding items. So that's awesome. And then there's just one last issue which we didn't account for, which is that all our code is doing is saying when add to list is clicked or enter is pressed, add whatever value was in that input field. And this doesn't protect us against if there's an empty value in the input field. So for instance, when we hit enter and there's no value, it's going to just create empty list items. And that's a pretty bad user experience. We want to protect against this. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that by using something that's called a conditional statement. There's some links in the show notes to more information about conditional statements in JavaScript. But a conditional statement is basically, it's available in a lot of programming language. And it's saying that if a condition is met, go ahead and execute this code. In JavaScript, conditional statements are also referred to as if-else statements. That is, if this condition is true, execute this code. Else, do this. So you can think of a lot of instances, depending on a value, that we would want to perform different actions. So in our case, let's go hop back into our code and add our first if statement. So our if statement is actually going to just be written like this. If, and then our conditions are going to get added into these parentheses in a moment. And there is our curly braces. So that's our basic anatomy of an if statement. And what we want to put within this curly braces is the code that we want executed if the condition is true. So in this case, the condition is going to be that a valid item was input into the input field. And then we'd want to go ahead and execute this code to create a new list item and clear the value of the current input field. So let's go ahead and cut and paste this up here. Awesome. So now let's identify what our actual condition is going to be here. So we've already said that we only want this code to execute if there's an actual valid value in the input field. So we've already kind of targeted our value here. We saved it as a variable called item. So we know we're going to need that in this case. And if we jump into the console can be our playground for testing out a lot of JavaScript. So going back into the console, let's go ahead and open it up. So we want some insight as to how we can evaluate whether an item's value is true or false. When we're speaking the language of JavaScript, these are referred to truthy values or falsy values. So that's just adorable. And we need a way to actually assess whether, let's say, our item or our string with the to-do list item in it is actually true or false. So when we're talking about true or false values, they're actually referred to as Booleans. That's a type in JavaScript and many other programming languages that basically just means true or false, or in the case of JavaScript, truthy or falsy. So, for instance, in our console, JavaScript provides us a Boolean function. So we can write this word Boolean. You may or may not be familiar with it. And we can pass in a parameter to it, and it's going to assess whether value is true or false and return that to us. So in this case, we would typically be passing in an item string. So let's say we pass in an item string, and let's run that. It turns out to be true. So let's try passing in an empty string. False. So in JavaScript, any string, it doesn't matter what the text within it is a truthy value. If the string is empty, that's considered a falsy value. A shorter syntax for using this Boolean method is to do something like this. Let's go ahead and just replace this Boolean method here with 2 exclamation points. This is basically a shortened syntax from writing that Boolean function. So it works the exact same way, and we can assess any parameter as to whether it's true or false. So now let's take this and actually apply it to our code. So jumping back into our JavaScript file, we now have a little bit more insight to that if the item is a string with text in it, that value is going to be truthy, and this code's going to execute. If the string is empty, then this code's not going to run. We don't need to write an else statement in this case. We only want this code to run if the condition is true. So let's go ahead and give this a spin in our application. We can go ahead and close the console. And let's try adding an item now. New item. That's still getting added correctly. And let's try to add an empty item. Now nothing is happening. This is the exact behavior we want. So now we've tackled all the steps with adding an item to our to-do list. Next, let's work on actually crossing off an item when that checkbox is marked.